Thank you. One of the really nice things about coming to conferences like this, you get to see friends you've known for years and years, but only see them once or twice a year. There's an old saying among jewelers, it's make new friends but keep your old. These are silver, those are gold. These are some of my golden friends. Well, thank you. And those of you who haven't met Linda, she's sitting down here in a wheelchair. I want to explain that a little bit. You notice I'm walking around with a third leg here too, and got a little scar under my eye from having stitches taken out just day before yesterday. Before any wild rumor starts, we have no discord in our family, discord. In fact, we just celebrated 2 months ago our 50th, our golden wedding anniversary. Thank you. It's purely coincidental that I needed stitches right after she fell down the stairs. Doesn't sound good, but it actually happened that way. Well, thank you. I saw the list of former honorees, and I have to tell you, I think I've known every one personally. I saw Wilma Mankiller's name on there, so many other people that I've known over the years and met. The Indian community compared to, let's say, the African-American community in this nation or the Hispanic-American community is rather small. And if you're out there swinging and fighting, sooner or later you're going to meet other people that are doing the same thing. So when I saw that list, I thought to myself, well, I'm honored to be, to be in that category, but I have to tell you in all honesty, whatever I've done to help our Native American community doesn't measure up to what so many other people have done that are on that list, but I'm certainly delighted to be included. One of the things, they were from different tribes and different places in the country, but a lot of them, I think most of them, had kind of the same qualities. None of them came from riches and fame. Most of them got wherever they got through hard work, through dedication, through perseverance. Some came from troubled families, as I did. I was in an orphanage as a little guy. Some had dysfunctional relatives somewhere in the family, and some of them did not finish school, or they went through other trials and tribulations. But they all had the same quality of being able to pick themselves up and put it back together and keep charging forward to get to wherever their goal took them. I have to tell you, I wasn't born a senator. When I was a youngster, my dad was drinking pretty bad. My mom was in the hospital, and I was in and out of some foster homes. They were called orphanages in those days. They have a sanitized name for them now, I guess. But I was in a lot of trouble. When I was a young teenager, running with bad kids and getting in everything you can think of, I wasn't the kind of a youngster your family would want your youngster to run around with. And I still remember when I was about 14, maybe 15, I had a civics teacher by the name of Cusick, dear Mrs. Cusick. I don't know what I was doing to cause her trouble one day, but she said to me, "Young man," and whenever she started the conversation like that, you already knew you were in trouble. "Young man," she said to me, "when you grow up, you're going to be a menace to society." I still remember those words. Well, what do you know? Years later, when I'm sitting on the Senate floor with my colleagues, contemplating a difficult issue that was going to affect the lives of millions of Americans, I thought to myself what Mrs. Cusick had said, and I guess to some people, her prophecy came true. In any event, I didn't finish high school. Dropped out when I was a senior. The Korean War had started, and like so many of our native people, I didn't need to be drafted. I enlisted in the United States Air Force, left high school as a senior. When I was in Korea as a military policeman, though, I got to thinking, boy, that might not have been a real smart thing to do. I think it might have been nicer in that warm classroom than this cold foxhole. And so I took GED classes, and I got a GED equivalency of a high school, but I didn't get a diploma from my high school. Well, years later, I'm in Congress, I think in my second term, and I thought, I went to college because I went to San Jose State. I did my graduate work at San Jose State. I taught school. I did many other things too. But I had that little hole in my background, and I really wanted that high school diploma from my old high school. So I called the principal. This is 40 years late, right? I was supposed to graduate in 51. It was about 91. I called him. And I told him who I was. I said, I'd really like to come out and graduate with a class of 91, just to kind of fill in that little void in my background. He said, well, let me call you back, Congressman. It was before I went to the Senate. He called me back in a couple of weeks, and he said, well, We've looked up your records and we've decided to let you come back and graduate with a class of 1991. I said, great. And he said, however, you still have 100 hours of detention to serve. And I said, God, I was that bad, huh? He said, yeah, you were pretty bad. So they let me go back out and graduate with a class of 91. So I've got a kind of, I should have graduated out in 51, I got out in 91. In fact, Jay Leno made a big joke on the Tonight Show one time about it. He said, you hear about that congressman that went back after all these years? He dropped out of high school. Let that be a lesson to you. If you drop out of high school, you too may end up in Congress. Jay Leno. Well, I think that, those of us who are out there swinging and trying, there's really no end to it. And many of us who kind of got in, you might say, the backwaters of manifest destiny, after the relocation bills of the 1950s, up until that time, people were pretty quiet. There was sort of a reawakening of ethnic pride in those late years, though. Maybe it was really led by the African-American community in this country before us. But I saw a definite change. I can remember when I was a youngster, a little guy, that sometimes people would come off the reservation, go to the cities, and someone would actually hide their identity and be very quiet about where they came from, what their roots were. So Mr. Black Horse may become Mr. Black, things of that nature. It wasn't not uncommon in other minority communities too, because there was so much discord and prejudice at that time after World War II. But I think Indians had proven themselves during the war, certainly through the marvelous exploits of the code talkers and the other members of other tribes who were also code talkers. The Choctaw and the Cherokee and the Sioux and many others were too, as you probably know. And so we've certainly paid our dues. When I got to Congress, as Kevin said, there wasn't a whole lot of interest in Indian issues, but there had been others before me. The last one was Charles Curtis in the Senate. Charles Curtis was Kaw Osage on his Indian side and Anglo on the other side. He was in the House and the Senate and became vice president on the Harding administration. Many people don't know we actually had a Native American vice president. Now there are two, Tom Cole, who is a Chickasaw from Oklahoma, and Mark Wayne Mullins, who is a Cherokee from Oklahoma. So we have two on the House side. Still nobody in the Senate, so I always encourage our Native people to run for office. In the olden days, for our Plains culture, if you didn't agree with the decision in council, the old way was you would put a blanket on your head and walk out to show your disapproval of the decision. You don't do that in our form of government in the United States. You walk out and somebody else is going to make a rule and shove it down your throat, literally, when you're not there to defend your position. And so we finally getting to recognize, I guess, if you're going to make change, you've got to be on the inside. In those 70s, the years of the 70s, I had a lot of AIM friends. And in fact, I was one of the guys, the silent ones, that was gathering blankets and food around Davis, California, and Sacramento when I was living there and teaching school to give to guys who were in turn taking it by car down and putting on the boats to take it out to Alcatraz Island in those years. Although I wasn't out there, I knew a lot of the people were, and I had some AIM friends. And when I finally decided to run for office, I remember one of them said, "Why do you want to run for office to a government that took everything away from us?" And I said then what I still believe, and that is, if you want to make change, you've got to get on the inside. You've got to be on the inside to do it. You can't just be on the outside throwing rocks at them. You've got to have a seat at the table. And I'm glad to see that more and more Native people are running now. We have, I think, 90, if I'm not mistaken, 90 Native Americans in state legislatures. And I'm hoping that more and more of them will run for Congress. And some do. Almost every year, every term, somebody will run. But it's not inexpensive and not easy to do. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and unfortunately a lot of money, and sometimes you have to work your way up through the legislature, as I did, and before you ever go to Congress. But it's worth what you put up with. When I was in Washington, I was assigned to the First Committee on Interior and Insular Affairs, and that was in the late 80s, but it was when we framed up the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. Those of you who are a little older, you remember that. Certainly some of you helped work on it. Mo Udall was the chairman of that committee, a great congressman from Arizona who had a marvelous lifetime experience of friendship to Native people. And very frankly, when I look at wonderful facilities like this, in 1988, none of us who worked on that bill could have ever envisioned there would be a time when our native people own something like this, and it's not the only one. Indian gaming happens to be one of the avenues where they've made some money. Natural resources is another way. It doesn't work for all tribes, but now Indian gaming, it's the largest form of gaming in the United States, bigger than Las Vegas, bigger than Atlantic City and Las Vegas combined. I think it was $27 billion in revenue last year, and they hire about 500,000 people. So it's become a major factor. Well, guess what? We don't have 500,000 Indians to work in there, so these Indian casinos have done a world of good for everybody in the community. Probably 80% or more of the native people that work for the gaming tribes are not of native ancestry. They provide jobs for everybody, and that way they help everybody through the payroll taxes they pay and the networking of where those payroll taxes go and buying a new car or doing something else, taking the family to dinner or so on like that. So we have really, really made a big impact, I think. One of the few positive economic factors in a time in the last 8 or 9 years when we've had sort of a depressed economy with very, very slow growth. Well, I got into politics really, if I can jump back a step, kind of by accident. But the gentleman that I understand designed this award that has been given here, I don't know about the past, but this year, was a man who I've known forever through the art world by the name of Enoch Kelly Haney. Kelly's from Oklahoma, so if you're in Oklahoma, you know Kelly Haney because he ran 2 years before I did. We knew each other through the art world, and we used to see each other at art conferences, and we would get all involved in all kinds of discussions about what's happening in Indian country and recognizing how detrimental some things are to our native youngsters and what we need to do to make change and why we need to have a voice in the legislatures and in Congress and so on. Kelly ran for the Oklahoma legislature 2 years before I ran for the Colorado legislature, and he won. He served with great distinction, rose to the chairman of the Budget Committee in the Oklahoma State Legislature, and was never lost a race. Retired voluntarily to go back to his art, as I did too. Nobody had to throw me out. I knew the way home. And since my wife and kids had stayed on the ranch, I was commuting to Washington every week when I finally did get to Washington after I served in the Colorado legislature. But I didn't know much about politics, and I remember when I first got nominated, somewhat by accident. I wasn't their first choice, believe me. I was the last choice. I'd been living on the reservation. As we say in Indian country, I went back to the blanket. I was singing with a drum sometimes and dancing and doing my jewelry, and my hair was long, and I was, living Indian. And so I went to this legislative conference. Really, it was to nominate some local people on the ticket to run for sheriff and county commissioner and so on. I had gone to college with a guy named Al Brown who had retired to Durango, Colorado, and I bumped into him, and he was bored, and he was going to run for sheriff. I said, I'll come down to that meeting and try and help you along. So I did, and he was nominated and elected. So they asked a couple of other people if they would run for the legislature, and they each had an excuse, and they got to me. I was sitting over on the end of the bench, and they said, what about you? Would you try it? And I said, well, what do you do? And they said, well, we'll show you. And I said, well, does it take much time? No, it doesn't take much time. I said, does it cost much money? No, it doesn't cost much money. Lies. So I said, okay. So they nominated me, and when I got up and went out the door, there was an attorney there by the name of Sam Maines, who I got to be really good friends with. He represented the Southern Ute Indian tribe as their tribal attorney, and he was a hard-fighting old boy. I didn't know him from Adam. He said to me, you think you have a chance of winning? And I said, well, I don't know much about politics, but I've been to the Olympic Games and some big competitions in sports. I know a little bit about fighting. I think I can hold my own. I said, do you think I have a chance? He said, buddy, I think you have 2 chances, little and none. I didn't take that as a ringing endorsement. Well, Sam got to be a great friend and a big supporter after we got to know each other, but that's what I was up against when I first started, and maybe any beginner is up against that. It wasn't easy. Well, leapfrog forward, finally end up in the Senate, and fortunate for me, I had a great mentor, and that was Dan Inouye, who was already mentioned. Danny was the World War II veteran, Medal of Honor winner, great man, lost his arm in battle. I think it was in Italy at that time when he lost his arm. He was in the hospital at the same time as Bob Dole, in the same Veterans Hospital when they were both wounded. Danny he became one of my very best friends, and also my mentor too. Really did help me. He really was the prime leader of the bill to build the National Museum of American Indian. I was the House sponsor. I was still in the House when I carried that bill. And of course, it took us, 18 years to raise the money and do all the stuff we had to do to actually get the doors open. But when we finally did open the doors, according to the Park Service, the largest number of people, Indian people, were on the mall during that grand opening of any time in American history. And it was a grand thing to see. I saw people, for instance, Indian people carrying pictures of their deceased dad or uncle or so on in military uniform, carrying them in the procession. And it's really been the flagship institution for us to tell our story. Sometimes Indian people see that building and they just say, that's our house, that's our house, that's our home. And indeed, it is their home too. So we've come a long way. And when Danny and I we did not play the partisan thing. It's a little partisan in D.C., and whoever's running the show, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, they make all the rules. When Danny and I were chairman and vice chairman, and depends in the leadership in the Senate that determines who's chair and vice chair of every committee, usually the majority party keeps all chairmanships. The minority party gets nothing. They call them ranking, but not in the leadership. Danny and I always cooperated and coordinated everything. If he was there, he would chair the hearings. If I was there, I'd chair the hearings. But we never passed a bill without a couple of things. One was floating a draft before the tribes so they could read it beforehand and have some input in the darn thing before, instead of the historical way of passing legislation and dumping on a tribe in a big surprise and they don't even know what has come to hit them. So tribes had a very direct voice when Dan and I were on committee. And I think they still have a good committee and they still run it pretty much the same way now. And I'm glad to see that. We worked on an awful lot of bills to create jobs, bills to reduce violence against women, bills to build justice centers and job creation, literally every kind of a thing you can imagine of, sooner or later we did take up. And so when Dan passed away just a few years ago, I was on the board of the National Museum of American Indian, and Kevin and the board did. The last meeting, in fact, I went to happened to be in Honolulu, so we did take a side trip, and we went to what is called the Punch Bowl. It's above Honolulu if you're from Hawaii. It's a national military cemetery, and Dan's grave is right by the road, so that when the road gets crowded, they don't want people stopping and taking all the space on these narrow roads, and so they like you to kind of keep moving, but he's right beside the road, so at least we could slow down and stop for a minute and pay our respects. Danny was a great leader, and I still miss him to this day. Well, we did an awful lot of things, but tribes, certainly, many tribes are reaping the result and the success, not because of me, but I had a little piece of helping out with the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act and so many others too, but it unleashed the shackles on some of our tribes and let them be what they do best, and that is make their own decisions. And facilities like this are part of that result. But unfortunately, we're not in a position yet where the tide of success raises all canoes. And if you travel Indian country like some of us do, majority of our people are not in the position that a few of ours are. If you are a tribe that has natural resources or near a metropolitan area or a resort area or interstate, you've done well through the Indian Gaming Act and raised enough money to, spin off other industries too within the tribe. But there are still places where Native people are still desperately poor. It is not uncommon to go to some of the northern reservations, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, and so on, and see unemployment that's up in the 70 or 80%. I have some second cousins at Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and Dave, used to be my chief of staff, was sitting with me down here. We were up there a few months ago, and I told my relatives, come on, let's go out to eat, and I'll take care of the bill for you. So we went to about the fanciest thing in Pine Ridge, which was what was that? a Subway. Yeah, I can't even remember the name. Subway, about the fanciest place in Pine Ridge. I told them get whatever they want, so they did. And so one man was sitting there that's a son of a second cousin. He got a foot-long Subway, and he ate half of it, and he wrapped up the other half. And I said, aren't you hungry? And he said, yeah. And I said, why don't you eat the rest of that? And he said, because I have nothing to eat tomorrow. That's how poor some of our people still are. Pine Ridge, which is the homeland of the storied and famous Oglala Sioux tribe, we were told when we were up there they've had 40 teenage suicides in the last 1 year. Not 4, 40. And 70% unemployment and up is just average. Fetal alcohol syndrome, outrageous. Diabetes, outrageous. All the other afflictions that we have and problems we have on some Indian reservations, it's just beyond description that could be that way in a nation that can, fly to the moon and cure polio and do all these other marvelous things we've done as Americans. Why is that still there? So we've got a long way to go. But I know that I'm speaking to the choir because the majority of people in here are ahead of me on that curve and have already committed a good portion of their life to try to make things a little better for people who certainly need it. Nobody in Indian country that I know of wants a handout, but I don't think there's anything wrong at all about giving them a hand up or helping them a little bit where they need a little help to get them started. And I was just very proud and honored to be a little piece of that, and just want you to know why, even though I'm hobbling around a little bit and getting a little long in the tooth, as the cowboys say, I've still got a few good fights in me, and I expect to make sure that I'm fighting for Indian country. Thank you so much.